Hello, you. How are you? Now, at some point in the last couple of years, someone in your institution has stood up in front of a room full of people and they said the word transformative. And then, because it felt so good, they said it again. And then a third time, possibly while gesturing at a slide that was 80% stock photo and 20% the word innovation in a bold, sans serif font. And you nodded. Everyone nodded because that's the social contract of the all-staff briefing, isn't it? We nod and then we write something down and then we go back to our desk and we open up a tab and we have all the best intentions in the world, but we then think, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know what any of this is supposed to be. Here's the thing. That feeling, that persistent low-grade sense of not quite keeping up, it's not because you haven't paid attention. It's not because you missed the foundational course and it's not because you skipped the right LinkedIn course. It's because the field itself keeps moving. The vocabulary shifts. The architecture shifts. The thing that counted as a working understanding 6 months ago has quietly become the floor. And nobody's told you that there were now new stairs. You can have a perfectly reasonable grasp of what AI is. Pattern recognition, language models, clever autocomplete at scale. And you still find yourself completely at sea the moment when someone starts talking about agents, or why grounded content is the difference between a system you can actually deploy an institution and one that confidently makes things up and gets you on the front page of the Times for the wrong reasons. These two things, agents and grounding, are, in this Cop on a Sticks view, the concepts that matter most right now, and they're going to get explained the least. We're coming back to both of them repeatedly because they deserve to be explained properly. But first, I'm Andy, and this is AI Levels. This is a podcast about artificial intelligence in higher and further education, made for people who are done being dazzled and ready to actually understand what's going on. Now, you might be a faculty member, nervous about what AI means for your day-to-day. You might be a CIO, versed in the landscape, but tired of being sold to, looking for something that's genuinely informative rather than a vendor pitch with a playlist. Well, whoever you are and wherever you are, I've got you. We start today, and we're going to start at the beginning, which, as it turns out, almost nobody ever does. This is episode 1. Over the next 8 weeks, we're going to cover a lot of ground: agentic AI, student experience, governance and ethics, teaching practice, data analytics. And in the final episode, the next 2 years actually will look like and what you should probably be doing about it. Every episode stands on its own. So if someone sent you a link to episode 4 with the message, listen to this, hello you're fine, come on in, no homework required. But we're going to start here today with the stuff that somehow doesn't get properly explained because everyone's too busy acting confident to admit that they're not. Now, I find that maddening. It's frankly a bit of a systemic problem. You cannot make good decisions about AI in your institution, about policy, about tools, about how to support students, about what to do with the terrified lecturer who came to see you last week. You can't make any of those decisions well if you don't have a clear picture of what you're actually dealing with. So, plain language, no buzzword bingo, real stories. Let's go. Let's start with the most basic version of this question. What is artificial intelligence? Now, here's a definition that actually holds up. AI is software that can perform tasks which until very recently required human intelligence to do. That is it. Now, you can write that on a post-it note and you will already be ahead of the people presenting at education conferences. Trust me, I know. Reading text, recognizing images, translating languages, having a conversation, summarizing a 50-page policy document to something a human might conceivably read before a board meeting, these are things that used to need a person, and now, increasingly, they just don't. But here's the caveat, and this is the one I want you to carry with you because it matters enormously. AI doesn't think. It doesn't understand anything. It's got no idea what it's saying. It's got no feelings, no opinions, no secret agenda, no awareness. What it does is it pattern matches at a scale that is genuinely difficult to comprehend. It's been trained on vast amounts of human-generated content, text, images, code, data, and it's learned to produce outputs that look like human intelligence. But that, my friends, is not the same thing. And in education specifically, the gap between those two things is where almost all the genuinely interesting and genuinely difficult questions live. Let me tell you something about a guy called Arthur Samuel in 1959. But let me tell you about a very specific moment in 1959. Now, Arthur Samuel was a researcher at IBM, and he was working on a program that played drafts, the board game, checkers if you're American and you just can't see how to do anything properly. What made it interesting wasn't that it could play drafts, it was how it got better at playing drafts. You see, Samuel didn't write a list of rules. He didn't tell it, if your opponent is here, move there. Instead, he let the program play thousands of games against itself. and it learned from the outcomes. Win, lose, what patterns led to what results. It got better, not because someone programmed it to be better, because it learned from experience. He called this machine learning. And the thing that he wrote about it, published in a journal that almost nobody read at the time, is now considered one of the foundational documents of artificial intelligence. He was doing this, by the way, in 1959 on hardware that had less computing power than the phone in your pocket. The ideas were always there. It was the hardware that took a while to catch up. Now that's the lineage, and that's where all this comes from. But where are we today? What do people mean when they say AI today? Well, they're usually gesturing vaguely at one of several very different things that have been unhelpfully blurred together. So let's pull them apart. Machine learning, we mentioned that earlier. What is it? Well, it's a broad category. The core idea with machine learning is training on data, finding patterns, and improving over time, the same as it was in Samuel Strauss' program all those years ago. It's just that now the data that's being used and the scale that's in play is vastly, incomprehensibly larger. Deep learning is a particular approach to machine learning that uses structures loosely inspired by how brains work, neural networks. They handle complex, messy, unstructured data such as images and speech and language. This is the technology that's making the current moment possible. Large language models, LLMs. Now, they're what basically everyone means when they say AI right now. ChatGPT, Claude, Gemini, they're trained on staggering amounts of text, extraordinarily fluent, capable of writing and explaining and coding, and apparently even passing a bar exam. Whether that means anything is a question we'll come back to. Generative AI is the umbrella term. It's AI that creates text, images, audio, video, code. LLMs are the most talked about type of generative AI, but the category is broader. And finally, narrow AI versus general AI. Now, here's something that will save you from a lot of nonsense. Everything that exists today, every single AI system you've ever interacted with or read about is narrow AI. It's extraordinarily capable within specific domains, but it's completely useless outside of them. It can't generalize. It doesn't understand. It's got no model of the world beyond the patterns in its training data. General AI is a system that reasons across domains. There's something resembling real understanding, but that's not the case. It might resemble it, but it's not actually happening, not even close. If someone tells you it does, they're either confused or they want your money, probably both. The confident predictions about when this type of AI will arrive range from next year to never, and they've done so for decades. So, file it under interesting threat or concept, don't worry about it, and get back to the actual problems that are in front of us. But why does the precision matter so much? Well, when a senior leader says we need an AI strategy, they almost certainly mean we need a plan for large language models and generative AI. That's a specific, manageable challenge, not AI in the sweeping, everything is about to change, cover of Time magazine sense. And when a student hands in an essay that sounds suspiciously polished, the question isn't, is this AI? It should be, what kind of AI? Trained on what? In what context, producing what kind of output, and what does that tell us about what assessment is actually for? Now, those are different questions, and I think they're better questions. Precision in language is a form of respect for the people you're talking to and for the complexity of what you're actually dealing with. I'm going to interrupt slightly to introduce a new segment that I'm going to be doing every single podcast called The Explainer. Now, this is our AI Level Up Explainer segment. What we're going to do is we're going to take one term that you hear about in AI, and every episode we're going to explain what it is in plain English. No fluff, no bull. We're just going to tell you what that word that you keep hearing really means. And this week, hallucination. Not the fun kind. In AI, a hallucination is when a model confidently tells you something is completely, demonstrably, sometimes almost impressively wrong. Here's a real example. In 2023, a lawyer in New York named Stephen Schwartz used ChatGPT to research legal cases for a court filing. ChatGPT gave him 6 cases, real-sounding case names, real-sounding courts, real-sounding citations. He submitted the filing. The opposing lawyers checked the citations. The cases didn't exist, not a single one. ChatGPT had, with great confidence and no apparent awareness of doing so, invented an entire body of legal precedent. The judge wasn't pleased, Schwartz faced sanctions, and the story made international news. This is not a bug. It's not something that's waiting to be fixed. It's a fundamental property of how systems work. They're not looking up facts in a database. They're generating text that is statistically probable given what they learned during their training. And sometimes the most statistically probable thing to say is wrong. This is table stakes knowledge for everyone in education. AI tools are not search engines. They don't have access to ground truth. They don't know what they don't know. And crucially, they will not tell you when they're guessing. They will state fiction in the same confident, well-structured prose they use for fact. Everything that matters should be verified. Everything. That's your AI Level Up Explainer for this week. So let's get back to talking about what AI is. And I want to talk to you about why I think this moment is different. What's changed recently that suddenly put AI so massively at the forefront of everything? Well, as I said earlier on, machine learning has existed since the 1950s, and neural networks have been around since the 1980s. So why has it dropped out so much in the last 2 or 3 years? Why has the pace picked up? Well, there were 3 things that landed at roughly the same time, and the combination of all 3 created something genuinely new. The first thing, scale. It changed everything. And for most of the history of AI, there was a problem. The ideas were good, the models were just too small, and the data was too sparse, and the computers were too slow to do anything really impressive with them. Progress was real, but incremental. Then starting around 2017, researchers figured out a new architecture for building language models called the Transformer. And everything started accelerating. The models got dramatically larger. The training data were incomprehensibly vast. The computing power behind them started consuming the electricity output of small cities. And something strange began happening at a certain scale. The models started being able to do things that smaller versions couldn't. Not because anyone trained them to. Their capability just emerged from them. Now, researchers call this emergent behavior. The jump from GPT-3 to GPT-4, for instance, wasn't incremental. People who use both describe it as feeling qualitatively different, like something had changed in kind, not just degree. Now, whether that's a real phenomenon or an artifact of how we perceive it is still being debated, but the practical result, the thing you could actually do with the output, changed dramatically. The second thing is the interface. Now, here's something that doesn't get said enough. The thing that changed the world wasn't GPT-4, it was the chat box. For most of its history, using AI properly required a software engineer, a data scientist, ideally both, and a budget. Now, you need to understand APIs and data pipelines and model parameters in order to get it to work. The work of getting something useful out of a model was itself a technical skill. ChatGPT's launch in November 2022 changed that completely. It took an extraordinarily powerful model and put a text box in front of it. You type, it responds. That's the entire interface. The barrier to entry went from you need a technical team in several months to you needed a Wi-Fi password and 30 seconds. Now that sounds like a small thing, but it wasn't a small thing. The third thing that changed was the speed. ChatGPT reached 100 million users in 2 months. Instagram took 2.5 years. The telephone took 75 years to reach 15 million users. There has never, in the history of consumer technology, been adoption of anything at this speed. The education sector had no runway. There was no rollout. There was no time to form a working group, develop a policy, consult with students, run a pilot. It arrived mid-semester in everyone's pocket, already being used. And let me tell you what that looked like from the outside. A lecturer at a large UK university told me this story. It was January 2023, just weeks after ChatGPT had launched. She was marking a set of undergraduate essays when she noticed one that read differently. Not wrong, not obviously plagiarised, just smooth in a way that felt slightly off. No rough edges, no half-formed sentences, but no personality. It was like a perfectly ironed shirt, but nobody was wearing it. She ran it through a detection tool, which was inconclusive. She spoke to the student. The student admitted they'd used ChatGPT, but said they'd rewritten the output, edited it, and shaped it. I used it like a rough draft, they said. She thought about that for a long time because she couldn't work out whether that was academic misconduct or just a student describing fairly accurately what a lot of professional writers and researchers now do every single day. She never resolved it. And that's kind of the point, because in practice, the institutions now are sitting there thinking, what should we do about AI? And also, why haven't we done it already? Often in the space of just a single week. The pace of change that's being revealed here is showing in rather unflashing clarity that most institutions' governance structures are not built for responding to anything fast. For staff, it meant having access to something genuinely powerful with no training, no policy, and no answer to the question, why am I allowed to use this? Many of them used it anyway, sensibly, quietly, and they felt vaguely guilty about it, which, when you think about it, is completely absurd. The guilt isn't anybody's to carry. For students, it meant having a tool that could rewrite their assignments, knowing they had that access, and having to make a decision about whether or not to use it when there were rules that were either inconsistent, or had been written in a panic on Thursday afternoon and published on a Friday. It created a very, very messy situation. And this is the world we're operating in right now. It's messy and it's real, and pretending it isn't working out for anybody. Now, I'm going to make a commitment to you now at the start of this series. I'm going to treat higher education and further education as different things. because they are different things. And the fact that almost every conversation about AI in education defaults to the university context, think pieces, conference panels, QAA guidance documents, published research, is doing FE a disservice, because further education sector is dealing with real, immediate operational challenges around AI. And it's largely having to figure those ones out without the research infrastructure, the dedicated strategy teams, or, frankly, the luxury of spending 2 years debating the epistemological implications before doing anything. You have no idea how difficult that was to say. In fact, if you just listen to me say it, you probably do have an idea, because I'm not convinced that came out that well. Never mind, let's move on. Let's have a look at a rough map here as to how things tend to differ between the two of them. Now, in higher education, the AI panic started predictably, perhaps inevitably, with the essay, the dissertation, the assessed piece of writing that is the backbone of how universities have measured learning for centuries. Suddenly, students had access to a tool that could produce competent, coherent, properly referenced responses to almost any question in under a minute. Universities have spent decades, centuries in some cases, building the credibility of their qualifications. Generative AI arrived and stuck a question mark on top of all of it. The response from most institutions followed a fairly predictable pattern. A holding statement was issued, a working group was convened, policy was drafted. Detection software was procured, used with great confidence, and quietly discovered to be unreliable. But then it was used again, this time with slightly less confidence. Some institutions banned AI entirely, discovered this was unenforceable, and just walked it back. Others moved to AI-permitted assessments or in-person exams or defences or portfolio submissions. The sector is still genuinely working out what assessment is for in a world where the written answer is no longer a reliable proxy for the thinking behind it. That's a legitimate and fascinating question, but it's not the only question. There's also the research angle, which is enormous and it's under-discussed in public. AI and literature reviews. What's legitimate? AI and data analysis. What needs to be disclosed? AI and grant writing. Where is the line? The academic publishing world is quietly having an identity crisis about this and mostly doing it behind closed doors in editorial board meetings that aren't minuted and conversations that don't make it into policy documents, but they are happening. In further education, it's different. Their concerns are more operational, and if I'm honest, they sometimes can feel a bit more grounding. Staffing is leaner. Digital infrastructure is more variable. Some colleges are well resourced, many are not. The student body is frequently more diverse in age, background, prior experience, and relationship with technology than the average university cohort. A level 3 adult learner returning to education at 42 has a very different relationship with an AI writing tool than an 18-year-old who's been using it since secondary school. The question in FE is less often how do we protect the integrity of our assessments, and more often, how do we make sure our students leave with skills the world is actually going to require? And simultaneously, how do we help our staff do their jobs? The admin, the tracking, the marking, the pastoral work, the bloody compliance documentation without working themselves into the ground? These are good questions, and they're urgent questions, but they're not getting the airtime they deserve. Now, I think about a principal that I spoke to last year who runs a mid-sized FE college in the north of England. She'd been to a conference on AI and education, 2 days, multiple panels, lots of slides. She told me that almost every example, every case study, every we've been doing this in it work story was from a Russell Group university with a dedicated digital innovation team. Nothing wrong with any of it, she said. I just kept thinking, I've got 14 staff members covering everything from IT to HR to student welfare, and I need them to do it 2 jobs worth of work already. So where's my version of AI to help me with this? The question is what this series is trying to answer. Both of those questions, in fact, for both those sectors. There's one thing, however, that does hold everywhere. Institutions that are navigating this well, and there are some in both sectors, I know, I'm working with them, are doing genuinely impressive things. And they've got one thing in common. They've decided that AI is a leadership question and not an IT question. You cannot delegate this to the digital team and expect something coherent to emerge. Not because the digital team isn't talented, because they are, but because the decisions AI forces you to make are fundamentally about what your institution is for, what learning means, what qualification means, what your obligations are to students who are entering a labour market that is visibly changing around them. Those are questions for the board, for the principal, for the Vice-Chancellor's office, because they belong at the top table, not because AI is magic. We've established it isn't, but because the questions that it raises are. Now, every episode I'm going to bring you one story from the world of AI that I think is worth your time. It's not necessarily the biggest headline. It's not necessarily education specific, but it's something I think illuminates something real about where we are and where all this is going. Quirky, often obstreperous, and always entertaining, I hope. I'm going to call it The Signal. Because the problem with AI news right now is the noise to signal ratio is absolutely appalling. And just with our AI explainer, this is going to be a regular segment every week. Everything is breathless at the moment. Everything is either the end of the world or the dawn of the golden age. The Signal is my attempt to find one story per week that actually tells you something you want to know. And this week's story is the Pope. Stay with me, honestly, there is a point to this. On the 25th of May, 2026, Pope Leo XIV published his first encyclical. Now, an encyclical, for those who aren't steeped in Vatican bureaucracy, is about the most significant formal teaching document a pope can issue. It goes out to the entire Catholic Church, 1.4 billion people, and it sets out the Church's position on a major moral or social question. This one is titled Magnificat Humanitas, Magnificent Humanity. And it's about artificial intelligence. Now, here's the part that stopped me in my tracks. Leo XIV didn't just pick this topic. He deliberately, consciously, provocatively signed this document on the 15th of May, the 135th anniversary to the day of his predecessor, Pope Leo XIII, signing an encyclical called Rerum Novarum. Rerum Novarum, of New Things, was written in 1891, and it was the Catholic Church's response to the Industrial Revolution, to factories, to child labour, to the destruction of traditional ways of working a class. The chaos and suffering that came with rapid, uncontrolled technological change scared everybody. It argued that workers had to have rights, that capital had obligations. It argued as a social construct. Yes, the Catholic Church believes in socialism. Okay, that might be going a bit too far, but, we can dream. It became one of the most influential social documents of the 20th century. It shaped labour, trade union movements and welfare policy right across the world. And Leo XIV is saying this is the moment in our time of that moment. AI is this generation's industrial revolution. We need the same kind of reckoning. And what makes it even more extraordinary is who we invited to stand next to him at the launch. Christopher Olah, one of the co-founders of Anthropic, the company that makes Claude one of the leading AI systems in the entire world. A Silicon Valley AI researcher on stage at the Vatican at the formal presentation of a papal encyclical. Think about what that represents. The oldest continuous institution in Western civilization and the newest, most disruptive industry in human history in the same room at the same lectern trying to figure out the same question. What do we owe each other in the age of machines that can think, or at least appear to? Now, you might be Catholic and you might not. It doesn't matter. I don't care what religion anybody is. What matters is that when the Pope writes a document on AI and invites a co-founder of one of the biggest AI companies in the world to stand next to him at its launch, it tells you something about the scale of what we're reckoning with. This has moved beyond tech policy. This is a civilizational question now. And if you work in education, in an institution whose entire purpose is to prepare human beings for the world, to develop their capacity to think and reason and contribute, this is not an abstract concern. This is your job. That's the signal for this week. Okay, still with me? You liars, you're probably off watching telly or something. This in the background, aren't you? But if you are still with me, thank you. We covered a lot today. We started with the basics, what AI actually is. We talked about software that pat matches at scale to produce outputs that like human intelligence, even though it hasn't got anything like it. We saw the landscape, machine learning, deep learning, LLMs, generative AI, and we drew a clear line between narrow AI, which exists and is genuinely remarkable, and general AI, which doesn't, despite what people on LinkedIn want to tell you. We told the story of Arthur Samuel and his drafts painting program because understanding that the ideas behind this have been developing since the 50s helps you stop treating it as a sudden alien arrival and start treating it as something human beings are building towards with all the complexity and consequence that implies. We talked about why this moment is different, the scale, the interface, the speed, and the story of a lecturer who couldn't decide whether a student's use of ChatGPT was misconduct or just writing. We looked at why HE and FE need their own versions of this conversation, not one conversation that pretends there's only one kind of institution. And we met a principal who sat through 2 days of AI and education and came away thinking, where's my version of this? Next week, we're going to talk about agentic AI. This is the one that generally keeps me up at night, not in a panic, but in a this is beyond interesting kind of way. We're going to talk about what happens when AI doesn't just answer questions, but acts, plans, uses tools, takes steps, does things in the world on your behalf. It's already here. It's coming to your institution whether you're ready or not. And next week, we're going to make sure you're ready. If this episode was useful, or if it finally answered a question you've been embarrassed to ask in a meeting, send it to somebody. Tell them to take a look. And if you've got feedback and thoughts on it, let me know. I'm always keen to speak to you. I'm Andy. I'm your AI education guy. And this has been AI Levels. Thanks for listening. I appreciate you.